Could the result of the US presidential election see us heading closer to World War III? Donald Trump says a Kamala Harris victory would, but claims he would prevent one. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the world has twice before seen the horrors of fighting a global war. Now, with conflicts escalating in the Middle East and Europe, are we now on the edge of another world war? And who can prevent it from escalating?
The world is in tremendous danger. We're in danger of possibly a World War III.
It's a warning Donald Trump has used over and over again. Trump claims he would prevent another world war. The US election comes at a precarious time internationally, with Israel's military action in Gaza, Iran and Lebanon, China's military build-up around Taiwan, and the Russia-Ukraine war, which Trump claims he could end in a day. Vice President Kamala Harris has reaffirmed unwavering support for Ukraine and for Israel, but her repeated calls for a Gaza ceasefire and the release of hostages have so far not had an impact.
I will never hesitate to take whatever action is necessary to defend our forces and our interests against Iran and Iran-backed terrorists.
In Asia, America has ramped up its support for Taiwan, steering billions of dollars toward US forces in the Pacific. The Pentagon has warned Beijing is maintaining its goal of being able to invade Taiwan by 2027.
We haven't faced a threat like this since World War II.
The decision made by Americans on November 5th will impact the world for decades to come. Is a new era of peace around the corner? Or will today's conflicts spill over and escalate?
Well, let's meet our guests in Beirut. We have Najat Aoun Saliba. She's a member of Lebanon's parliament. In North Wales in the UK, we have Paul Ingram, who's from the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk. That's at the University of Cambridge. And here with me in the studio, we have Greg Swenson, who is chairman of Republican Overseas UK. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Greg, I'll come to you first. Whoever wins this US election will be taking power at a time of great global disorder and uncertainty. What makes you think Donald Trump is the personality to calm things down?
I'm not sure it's his personality that will calm things down, but in many ways, I expect he will, because it's one of the unique periods, or it hasn't happened in 100 years in the U.S., where you have two incumbents, basically, or quasi-incumbents. So it's a chance to look at, Trump's administration and what the policies and outcomes were in the Middle East, and then the Biden-Harris administration. And I think if you look at it that way, I would argue that peace in the Middle East is much more likely under President Trump than under President Harris. But, I don't know that Vice President Harris would be very different or not from President Biden. And that's the real great mystery, is would she just continue his policies or perhaps change them one way or the other? But what we can argue is Trump is a really consistent supporter of Israel. And he was consistently, I wouldn't say hostile, but he was consistently arguing that Iran should be, sanctioned when it was the right time for sanctions and not necessarily appeased. And so I think if you look at his record and his record of success, I would argue, we can expect a better outcome in the Middle East.
And Greg, just briefly, what's the vibe like inside the Republican camp right now?
It's very positive right now. The trend has been good for President Trump. He's been a little bit more disciplined in his campaigning, and so I expect that will continue through Election Day. It's only a week away.
Let's bring Najat in. Najat, what's your take on a Trump victory? What would he do for everything that's going on in the world right now? Do you have fears that he would fan the flames?
Well, if you allow me to disagree a little bit with Greg, because he said he would calm things down. I'm not sure how much influence he would have on Netanyahu not to continue expanding with his plan and continue bombing Gaza, Lebanon, and perhaps Syria. This is one issue that is extremely important because of his endless support of Israel. I'm not sure if he can calm things down from this end. Also, he has said that he will. It's a great opportunity for him to stop Iran from expanding and having influence. Kushner said maybe it's a great opportunity to take on Iran and stop it. And at the same time, I think what's going on around the world would make us probably wonder if Trump is going to be able to calm things down. As for the Middle East, we don't expect any change. Both Harris and Trump have announced and have made clear that they have their support to Israel. I don't think the Arabs and the Middle East are visible on their agenda. I think the agenda of Israel will supersede anything else. So from this respect, I think I'm not sure if the chaos that Trump is going to bring and the full support that Biden and probably Harris has given to Israel are going to change anything in the policy and in the war going on in the Middle East.
So, Najat, you're quite adamant, no matter who wins between Trump and Harris, nothing will change for the people in Lebanon, nothing will change for the people in Gaza.
For the longest time, I think people in the Middle East have been invisible to the politics in the U.S. I think they have seen this area as an oil field, and they have fueled bipartisan, they have fueled sectarian conflicts in order for them to stay in control of everything that is happening here. One thing we could probably argue against this is the Abraham Accord that Trump has worked on, although it was a little bit, if you allow me to say, short-sighted because it didn't look at the whole solution in the Middle East. It's probably something that we can build on. I mean, I'm just giving the two sides of the story here. The Abraham Accord has not really worked on or clarified the two-state solution, although the two-state solution seems to be now very far from being implemented. And with that, we don't know how the Abraham Accord can continue to live or survive with the new development between Israel, Hamas, and Israel and Lebanon. And so, yes, I mean, for us, the foreign policy of the U.S. will not change vis-a-vis the Lebanese, the Gazans, or anybody else in the Middle East.
Paul, Donald Trump is portraying himself as the only candidate who can avert World War III. What's your take on his positioning of himself as a pacifier?
So I strongly welcome the idea that this election is important and that the stakes are high when it comes to global stability and the need for a pacifying element. We've seen over the last number of years, and I would say much more than 4, the actions of the US government being quite destabilizing, particularly in the Middle East. And I think we do need a president who takes the risks much more seriously. I have no faith at all that Donald Trump is the man to do that. I think that my reading, beyond the fact that he's unpredictable, which is not a good quality when it comes to stabilizing situations. The other dimension is, whilst we definitely do need a deal maker, somebody who's willing to talk to adversaries and treat them seriously, I think that Donald Trump's version of deal making is one in which it's about threat and it's about dominance and it's about knocking heads together and it's about being a strong man. And I don't think that's a very good place to be in a world where we have too many strong men already, and where we need genuinely pacifying, sensible, level-headed people who see the situation beyond their own national interest and the need for global governance that is about respecting diverse perspectives. And I don't think we get that in Donald Trump, quite frankly. Though what I do welcome is his willingness to talk to President Putin and to President Xi. And these are people that we need to be talking to, and we need to be understanding their perspective far better than the current president has been able to.
Greg, I've seen this acronym recently, CRINCS. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. So they're basically what America would view as the big threats on the global stage for whoever is the next president. Sure. Donald Trump is saying that the Democrats have failed to deal with these issues and he will have to deal with them should he become president in January. How's he going to deal with them all?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit of mystery to that because he is unpredictable and he likes to embrace hyperbole occasionally. And so, you know, he's probably talking up his game a little bit, that he can end the war in Ukraine, he can bring peace back to the Middle East. But I think, you know, Paul and Najat both had some really good points. You know, Trump is very anti-war. He is not one to start wars. He doesn't like to continue wars. He uses, when he has to, he uses military power, but he does it quickly, he does it effectively, and then gets out. And I think that's, you know, there's some merit to that. You know, he doesn't want to escalate any of this stuff. And I think the Abraham Accords, I'm glad that you brought that up. I mean, that was a really positive moment. And it was a shame, I think the Biden administration could have continued and maybe even produced more accords with different countries. But for the first 2 years in the administration, the Biden White House would not permit any staff to utter the words Abraham Accords.
Those words were banned?
The words were banned. For 2 years, they could not utter them, nor could they use them in memos or emails or anything. And I think it's partly because he wanted to reverse everything that Trump did or not give Trump credit. So there was some politics there. He realized that that was a mistake. And then finally, perhaps it was after October 7th, but he started embracing the Abraham Accords. Again, I think if in those first 2 years, they could have got the Saudis on board. That obviously is postponed now, perhaps indefinitely. But I do hope that if he does win, he can bring back some of that spirit of peace and prosperity to the region, and it started to work.
Najat, those countries, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, all dominated by big alpha male personalities. Do you think Trump will be able to handle them all, or will they see him as this kind of malleable guy that they can kind of mold and bend to their will?
Well, I think Trump has made it very clear that he wants to put tariff on all trades and all goods that are coming to the United States. And this is going to put him at a distance, if not at a conflict with all these powerful countries that need to take or play a major role in the global economy and the global power as well. And so I think there is a lot of negotiations that has to be taken. Also, there is the deal of energy, and we know that most of these countries are also transitioning into renewable energy in addition to also trading oil and gas. And so there is a lot at stake in order for them to just think that Trump is a malleable guy. There is I think we all feel that we're going into a new world of economy, a new world of energy, and whoever comes to be a president has to really understand the deep meaning and the deep consequences of all these steps that we are taking today, because this is dictating how the world is moving into its economy and energy dealing in the next 20 to 30 years. And also we have the climate change, we have wars going on everywhere, and there is the problem of Taiwan that is surfacing every now and then. So yes, of course, they would like to discuss those things with Trump, but I find it very hard for Trump to let go of his interest over some discussions or some friendship that he could strike with these countries. So there is a lot of stake in these negotiations that goes far beyond just being an agreeable person or a person who is able to make to approach the unapproachable, if we may say.
Paul, if there is to be a wider global conflict, What do you think might be the spark that will set everything in motion?
Gosh, it's very difficult to predict, and it is a question that I've been looking at quite a lot. The obvious answers are a spark over Taiwan. We are seeing potential sparks flying at the moment across the Middle East. We see Ukraine, of course, and the confrontation there. There could be new spark, between India and Pakistan, which has come off the agenda in the last 2 or 3 years, but actually is very unstable. I think the equally interesting question is, what are the trends? What are the moves in the relationships between these states that mean that the capacity to deal with these sparks when they're sparking away are much reduced, because states see themselves, or the state leaderships see themselves, as needing to save face, or to push their opponents, or to, quotes, restore deterrence, which essentially is code for being tough and being seen as tough, and that attitude, which I would sum up as the attitude of dominate or be dominated, which is so often the attitude of these leaderships. And I'm pleased to hear from Greg that he believes that Donald Trump is not amongst these, but I don't see the evidence myself. I see somebody who is willing to turn the volume up, to escalate, to de-escalate, to negotiate from a position of strength, which is so universal in the attitudes amongst these leaderships, that I'm seriously concerned that whatever the spark is, whether it is Taiwan, Ukraine, the Middle East, or the South Asia, or the South China Seas, in a sense, it's the attitude, it's the mindset, it's the belief systems, the dominant narratives that drive these leaders, whether they are from democracies or from autocracies. It doesn't seem to matter. In the end, they see themselves as needing to be strong, otherwise they are overrun. And if they are all strong, we end up sliding into World War III.
Greg, there hasn't been a huge amount of discussion in this election and all of the debates about foreign policy. Now, I can't figure out whether it's because this doesn't play well to a domestic American audience that just cares about the economy and the dollar in their pockets, sure, or is it because neither candidate is particularly strong on foreign policy?
Well, I can argue that Trump had a very successful foreign policy. It's not why he was elected in 2016, but the outcomes were very positive. We did have peace and prosperity in the world. So Kamala Harris is just untested. Nobody really knows what her views are. She hasn't done a lot of press, hasn't done a lot of interviews. But back to the first part of your question, yeah, Americans typically rank foreign policy pretty low in terms of election cycles and who they vote for. Every 16 or 20 years, it elevates. We had that in '84 with Reagan because it was the Cold War. So foreign policy was one of those, was never number one, but it comes up to number 3 or 4. And the same thing happened in 2004 during Iraq and Afghanistan and the war on terror right after 9/11. So it was elevated. This time it was elevated again, believe it or not. And then at the beginning of the cycle, and lately, the last few months, once the personal attack started, when Kamala Harris started attacking Trump personally, and it just brought the focus back to domestic politics. So there's really, and as we pointed out today, there's not that much difference in terms of the Middle East anyway. There's not that much difference. There is some merit to keeping your friends close and your enemies closer. I get it. Energy policy is something that is a major difference between the two. I think Kamala Harris will stay with the tilt toward renewables and the hostility toward fossil fuels. President Trump really liberated the fossil fuel sector. That brought oil prices down. The elevated prices after Biden took office really enabled Russia and Iran for sure. Also helped Venezuela, also helped the Saudis as well. Oil prices, high oil prices made things very difficult to keep Iran in check.
But it's fair to say this election, the average American is not that bothered about foreign policy?
I don't think so. It's become, look, people do care about Ukraine. People do care about the Middle East. It's front page news quite a bit. But it's never going to overtake the two big ones right now, which are inflation in the economy, number one, and the border crisis, number two. Those are the ones that are really moving the needle. Trump's pulling ahead of Vice President Harris on both of those, so it makes sense for him to stick with that. He's only pulling ahead of her on foreign policy by 5 points. But on inflation, economy, and the border, he's up between 10 and 20. So that's the strength he has. He's probably going to stick with it.
Paul, I come back to you just briefly on that. You're in agreement?
Yes, and it's not just Americans. I mean, the world looks very different if you're actually receiving the bombs than if you're sending them. And across Europe, including the UK, foreign policy does not have an impact on election choices. And it's deeply unfortunate, which is why I began this interview welcoming Donald Trump's highlighting of the risks that we're in globally. Because I think whether the American electorate is listening or not, they need to understand, we all need to understand the mess we're in. We've already been talking about the global catastrophic risks of climate change and other dimensions that and the great power conflicts. We have to wake up to this. And it's not good enough just to think, oh, well, I have no influence, so I'm going to bury my head, I'm going to cast my ballot just on the basis of my own economic interests that are very short term. We need to be taking these issues far more seriously.
Najat, just on that phrase, being on the receiving end of bombs, we've seen your city bombed now, Beirut, for weeks and weeks. We've seen terrible loss of life. I mean, other people's foreign policy matters hugely for Lebanon.
The foreign policies of the U.S., whether it's from Democrats or Republicans, it has always been against or not in favor of the Arab people, especially people living in the Middle East. It was, in the contrary, always supporting Israel, no matter what decision they take, whether it's war or peace, and whether it's a genocide or mass killing. We did not see any president of the U.S. standing against the genocide that happened in Gaza and the genocide that is ongoing on the Lebanese people.
Greg, back to you. We heard Paul say earlier on that if there is a major spark that happens in the next few months, it could be Taiwan. Just tell me where Trump stands on that issue.
Yeah, I mean, look, Taiwan is probably, if anything happens there, it will happen before 2027 because Xi has said that. And so I think we can expect things to get worse before they get better there. I think Trump will be careful not to get the U.S. involved with, boots on the ground. But I would argue that a much more powerful Navy, a naval presence in the Pacific will be a better deterrent. And this goes back to Paul's comment, and it's hard to disagree. I mean, I'm actually pro-deterrence, and I think one of the things that worried me about the Biden administration, in spite of a couple of verbal missteps when he said he would support Taiwan, the government has always been careful about saying things like that. But at the same time, Biden cut defense spending in real terms 3% 3 years in a row. That's not good for deterrence, and I think that's a risk for NATO, but it's also a risk for our friends and our allies in the Pacific.
And just in summary, you're adamant Donald Trump will calm things down.
I really think he will. I mean, I can't promise that, but his record shows that he is one to calm things down. If he has to use military power, he will, but he's very careful and very averse to that. And he, if anything, his advisors in his first term were much more prone to use military strength, and Trump is very, very much against it.
Paul, final point to you. It's a good point Greg makes that in Trump's previous 4 years, there were no wars. America did not go to war. Yes, there were military strikes, but Trump did not go to war.
Yes, but I would also push back on this idea that the Abraham Accords were neutral. There are very strong arguments for putting the case that the Abraham Accords were the straw that broke the camel's back and led directly to October the 7th, as well, of course, as the election of a very hard-right Israeli government, because the Palestinians were cut out and normalization was happening. I've been to Israel a number of times, and it's very clear to me each time I go that normalization was the prize, and the deal to be had was some kind of two-state solution. But normalization was being offered to Israel without any significant ask of the Israelis, and the Palestinians were left behind. I think one has to also recognize that these foreign policy decisions and moves have a lag time, a time where the consequences take some years to come to fruition. This is not pushing back against everything Greg's saying there. It's just that things are a little more complex than just simply looking at where wars break out under whose watch, and that's the case for a number of policies.
Paul, Najat and Greg, thank you all so much for your insight on this one. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable, TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.